Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Mike Talbot with our webinar for this afternoon. We're just about to start. Today's webinar is about preventing homelessness with mediation. So just before we get on with that, for those of you that don't know, I'm Dr. Mike Talbot. I founded UK Mediation about 20 years ago, having been a psychotherapist for a number of years, and trying to apply my ideas to resolving conflict, really, using mediation, other conflict resolution skills, looking at resolving all types of conflict, including what we're talking about today, which is resolving the kind of conflict that can result in people, especially young people, becoming homeless. So here we go. We're just about to begin the webinar. I'll be speaking for about 40 minutes. If you're watching us live, and we do have a number of people on this afternoon, it's great to see everybody here. Very good numbers today. So it's great to see so many people here today from the UK, but also from around the world on this rather grey day in Derbyshire. I'm pleased to be doing this webinar for you this afternoon, which is all about, first of all, an overview of the Homelessness Reduction Act. The reason that some of these topics are in the news and are being talked about quite a lot is because of this new piece of legislation. So I'm going to mention briefly what that means, and in particular what it means for the greater use of mediation. And then talking about conflict within families and how conflict leads to homelessness. What is it that goes on that means that a young person in particular may choose to leave or be required to leave the family home? And then talking about where mediation comes in with all of that in terms of resolving that kind of conflict. And then looking at a case study, a situation just like this. And then talking about how mediation works. So a few just bare bones of the mediation process, the bare bones of the process, so you can see what this thing is. And then time for a Q&A. So you're very welcome. If you want to save your questions up to the end, that's fine. If you want to ask questions as we go along, that's fine as well. There's a chat box there if you're watching us live, so just type into the chat box there and I can see that and I can answer your questions as we go. So let's begin, and in time-honoured tradition we usually give you some statistics just to set the context for what we're talking about. So let's have a look at statistics around people's broken relationships with parents. So the figures here are that 40% odd of young people attribute running away from home to poor relationships with parents. So if a youngster, quite often in a critical situation, leaves the family home, about 4 out of 10 of such situations, it's because of a poor relationship with the parents. I imagine it means carers as well. So there we go, 4 out of 10, it's down to falling out with mum and dad. A critical issue for Runaways, this is in America from a few years ago. Critical issue for youth runaways is family dynamics. So they were asked whether or not this is a critical issue, and it's about 90% of runaways say it's a critical issue. So, you know, the family is extremely important in this situation. And this is quite a shocking figure. We're back to the UK with this one from Homeless Link. Just about 6 years ago, this survey was done. And around about a third of people have been or know somebody who has been homeless. That's quite shocking in 2019. Coming on for 2020, that 1 in 3 people either has been or knows someone who has been homeless. And I think in terms of doing these webinars and how we time them over the year, you know, we're just coming up to Christmas, we're coming up to the coldest part of the year. I find this quite shocking and not a little bit upsetting, really, that there's so many people, 1 in 3, who either have been or know somebody who has been homeless. And then another figure here is that in terms of absolute numbers, back to Homeless Link again in the UK, there's around about that number of people, 320,000, who are considered to be homeless. That's a tricky figure to assess as well, but we reckon that it's around about that according to the Homeless Link survey. So I talked there about people leaving the family home and about the critical issue being relationship with parents, and so many people are leaving because of the breakdown in the relationship with parents. But also in terms of figures of the absolute figures of people becoming homeless, other than the breakdown in the family, it's to do with the loss of private tenancy. So people are in private rented accommodation, and it's the loss of that tenancy that is actually the most common cause of homelessness. And in 2016 we can see there's nearly 19,000 cases there where people have lost that tenancy. And these are quite up-to-date figures from Shelter, that was about a year and a half ago, that survey. So there's some numbers. High proportion of people who lose their private tenancies, high proportion of youngsters who fall out with mum and dad or carers or guardians and find themselves on the streets. And the critical thing being the relationships within the family. So a very large percentage there in those figures, where the key thing about being able to stay at home is the relationships with the parents and the other family members. So let's have a think about this piece of legislation. So this Homelessness Reduction Act came in 2017, and the key thing about this legislation is it's to do with prevention of homelessness. So there was a greater attention on and a greater emphasis on making sure that people don't go into free fall if they do lose their tenancy or if they are leaving the family home, to make sure that the local housing authority that they make sure that that person continues to have accommodation. So the particular change with the Act was trying to foresee a situation where somebody is about to become homeless. So this figure of 56 days was put on it, which is notionally 8 weeks. So if you're threatened with homelessness and you're liable to be becoming homeless within the next 56 days or a couple of months, then it's up to the local housing authority to see that you continue to have accommodation and don't go into free fall or find yourself sleeping rough. So it's trying to anticipate situations where somebody is about to become homeless, and in those cases there's a duty on the local housing authority to assess and to provide a personalised housing plan, so a plan for how that person's not going to end up on the streets, basically. And this breaks down into the sort of the relief, which in the Act, there's a direct quote from the Act there. It says, quotes, take reasonable steps to help the applicant to secure suitable accommodation, close quotes, and also including attempting mediation conciliation where somebody is threatened with being excluded by the parent or family. So this is the key thing for us, is that in this legislation now, part of the obligations on local housing authorities is to anticipate homelessness and also to try and resolve the sort of conflict that may lead to a housing applicant being threatened with being excluded by the parents or the family. So that's what we're talking about. This is where mediation comes in. This is where mediation comes in, is trying to ensure that people don't become homeless, or the bottom bullet point there is for people who are now homeless, looking at mediating in order to try and mend the relationship with the family, or at least to try and restore communication with the family, so that even if it's not appropriate for a person to go back into the family home, that there is still a relationship of support, a good communication between the family and the young person, such that that person doesn't get lost and doesn't sort of lose that vital lifeline in some cases. So just one other bit about the Act. So what's, in terms of the detail that's expected of the local housing authority, what's required is a thorough assessment and a personalised response to that person's housing need, and putting a renewed emphasis really on the prevention of homelessness. This is, again, a key thing in the Act, is not waiting until the person's homeless. It's actually trying to prevent that situation from coming about. And it helps anybody who is homeless and eligible. There were some limits on the qualifying criteria prior to this Act, but now we're looking at anybody who's homeless and anybody who's eligible for help will get that help. But there is an expectation on the applicant to cooperate with the housing authority. So in other words, if people don't turn up to appointments, don't contribute to making the personalised housing plan, or don't follow through on the actions that are on the housing plan, then clearly they're going to fall off the edge. So there we are, that's the Act, and there's some figures about homelessness, and in particular I'm drawing out the points from the Act there that make reference to mediation. So let's have a think about then, just drilling down a little bit in terms of this relationship between conflict and homelessness, what goes on. So how does conflict lead to homelessness? What goes on here such that a fallout in the family will lead to a young person getting kicked out? To illustrate this quite vividly, we have from one of our training videos a few scenes of a family conflict between a young person, Molly, and her mum, Sally, and some of the things that are going wrong between them that could potentially lead to Molly being made homeless. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll talk about that afterwards.
17-year-old Molly lives at home with her mum Sally and younger sister Ellie. Molly attends a college course and Sally has a part-time job. Relations between Molly and Sally have been difficult over recent months. Sally says Molly has become evasive and less communicative, and she has become impatient with Molly over this. Sally is also concerned that Molly is no longer prepared to contribute by helping out around the house. Molly is at a point of wanting to assert her independence more, and she gets irritable around Sally if she asks her too many questions or wants to know who she is with or where she is going. She also resents being asked to do chores. A new week is just beginning, and Molly and Sally meet in the kitchen at breakfast time.
Well, did you sleep well? In college this morning?
Yeah.
What time are you going in?
9.
How are you getting on with that piece of portfolio evidence? Are you struggling with that a bit?
Fine.
What time are you back?
Normal time.
Aren't you eating breakfast with me?
No.
Molly, bring your bowl down when you finish with it. I'm sick of all that stuff being in your bedroom. Hello. Oh, yes, it is. It's Sally. Molly's mum, yes. Oh, hello. It's nice to talk to you. Molly's not been attending college. No, I had no idea. She's not attended for 3 weeks. She's been packing her bags and saying each morning, I'm going off to college. And she sort of, well, in amongst everything, she sort of vaguely said what she's been doing. Right. Yeah. I've noticed a change in her attitude. Yeah, definitely. She's been quite rude and difficult. She's. I've had a sense that she's not always telling the truth, and she's been a bit evasive. Yeah, she's blocked me on Facebook, so I have a sense that she was beginning to hide things. But you know, part of that I thought was just growing up a bit. Well. Yeah, I'll wait until she comes in later, and then I'll have a word with her. Okay, I'll ring you. Have you got a phone number? I can get you on the phone, the number you've just rung me on. Okay, so if I give you a ring back as soon as I've spoken to her, and we can decide what to do and what's been happening. Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I do really appreciate it. I'm really, really sorry. I wouldn't have been letting it happen if I'd have realised. Okay, all right, thank you. Bye-bye. Molly, where have you been? You've been missing for 2 days.
Been with friends.
I've rang all your friends.
Well, I've been with friends. Why does it
ones?
matter? Just friends.
I've been worried about you.
It's just with friends.
And college is just wrong.
Oh,
What's
fuck
going
off!
on?
Why
Molly,
does
this
it
conversation's
matter?
not over. What's going on with your attitude?
Nothing.
It's terrible at the moment. Ellie shouldn't have to hear that sort of language from your mouth. She's only next door. Don't look at me like that. What's going on with college?
Nothing.
The phone has said you're not even coming to lectures. Your attitude's terrible. The room looks like a complete pigsty.
Oh, just leave
Where
me
are you
alone.
going?
I'm staying
Where are
with
you going?
friends.
Hello, Mum.
Mm.
You all right?
Yeah.
Nice evening last night.
Yeah.
About today. Where have you been today?
Just out.
Seen Holly or Sophie?
No.
Texting last night because you hadn't come in.
Why have you been texting my friends?
Because you're 17. You stormed out
Yeah,
last
but
night and I didn't know where you were.
That doesn't give you the right to text my friends.
Of course it does, I'm your
No,
mum.
it doesn't.
It does. They didn't know where you were either.
Yeah, why do they need to know?
Because I want to know where you are and what you're doing. Anything could happen to you. It matters. Put your phone down. What's going on with you?
Nothing.
I'm fed up with this, Molly. You live in this house. I pay for the phone that you spend your life on. You don't do anything around the house. You don't help out.
Yeah, but that's because you're my mum.
It doesn't mean you can then treat
Yeah, but you're
me
still-
and your
you're
little
still my
sister
mum.
so badly. Me, you and Ellie are a unit. Your dad went, so
Yeah,
that's just you.
no, your dad left because you were controlling him and you're doing exactly the
Oh
same
no,
thing to
he
me.
left to be with somebody
No.
else and he doesn't even want to see us.
No. He left because you were controlling him and you're doing the same thing to me.
Oh, it's a shitty thing to say, Molly.
Nothing.
Your attitude's terrible at the moment. What's going on with you?
Nothing.
You're lying all the time. You're deceitful. I don't know where you are, what you're doing. Your
Why
friends
do you
don't
need
know
to
where
know?
you
Why
are.
do they
we
need to
care
know?
about you. You've even taken us off Facebook. Why's that?
It's my life.
Is it? You were supposed to collect your sister last week. You never picked her
That's
up.
not my job. Keep your
Yes, it
nose
is.
out of my
Yes,
life.
It is. I've asked you to do something. You live in this house. You ought to help
Well,
me
I
out
won't
with
stay
things.
then.
What? Why are you still on your phone? What
I'm
is
not.
it? Give it here. What are you hiding?
Nothing.
What is it, Molly?
Fine then. That.
Well, who's
Steve.
he?
That's who I've been seeing.
He's old enough to be your dad.
No, he's not. I
Well,
can do what I want. I can see who I want.
Is that who you've been staying with?
Yes.
Has he been encouraging you
No,
not to attend
why
college?
do you care?
Well, I'm your mum.
Yeah, well, I'll leave then.
Well, do.
Well,
Why
fine.
don't
Just
you
get
leave?
out.
You'll be better with you out here. Hello, Sophie. What can I do for you? Right. She's been on your sofa. For how many days? Well, what's happened? I thought she was with this Steve. Right. So she's not telling you much about it? Well, thank you for calling me and letting me know. Is she there now? I can talk to her. Right, you don't know where she is? Oh, I see, you're going away. I hope she hasn't gone back to him. Well, thank you for letting me know. I do really appreciate it. Okay. All right, bye, Sophie. Hello? Yeah. Sorry? You're a homeless charity? Oh, you've got Molly with you? Oh, thank goodness for that. Is she all right? Okay, why is she with you? Yeah, I knew what was happening to her a couple of days ago because her friend Sophie has spoken to me to say that she'd been on a sofa, but then she was going on holiday. And then we'd got no idea where Molly had gone, and she's not answering any phone calls or texts. Well, yeah, she might have said that I didn't want her back, but we're in the full-flowing argument. She's been very, very difficult. She hasn't been going to college, and as we thought, she'd moved in with this older man. And she wasn't listening to me. She wouldn't have anything to do with me, or her friends for that matter. Yeah. Mediation. what is it? Right. So I'd come in and have and talk to her. Oh, but I've talked to her loads. It's making absolutely no difference. She's not listening to me, and we just end up arguing, and it just gets out of hand, and it just gets even worse. Right, okay. I can't come in today. I've got to collect her sister from school. I could come tomorrow after I've dropped her daughter off. Okay, if you text me where you are, and I'll come in as soon as I've dropped her off. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
So there we have, I think you'll agree, a very vivid illustration of the kind of things that can go wrong with a young person and his or her parents. In this case, not an unusual case. So there are expectations of the parent in this case, and as the young person trying to assert her independence, there's clearly the influence of peers and a changing lifestyle on the part of the young person. There are clearly some pressures, practical and psychological, I would say, on the parents, who's got the younger child as well, and trying to ensure the well-being of both the older daughter and the younger child, and clearly having a bit of a clash of values, a clash of expectations, which could really lead to a bad place, as we've seen, and the potential there for the young person to end up having to leave the family home. So let's move on with this a little bit. So let's start to characterise some of these things that can happen. So there can be actually in the family home, that a common cause of problems that can lead to the young person leaving the home is actually conflict or abuse between the parents or between carers. So this is a breakdown in the relationship between the parents and carers, or more seriously, domestic violence or things arising from misuse of drugs and alcohol. And as we've seen on the video there as well, the situation where the young person is pushing boundaries that the parents or carers want to maintain, the times that the young person comes in the house, their lifestyle habits, how they contribute to the household, messiness or personal habits around the house. These can be problems that the parents want to impose some boundaries and the young person's not having it. And clearly in this case as well, as illustrated in the video, there can often be conflict arising from where the parents or carers don't know what the young person is up to, and sometimes where they don't care what the young person is up to. So a lot of situations, I'm not exaggerating here, of where the people who are in the position of supposedly looking out for the young person's welfare are not doing so. This can lead to significant problems. And of course where the parents and carers' mental health or their own lifestyle, their own misuse of drugs and alcohol, or issues to do with mental health, or issues to do with other aspects of their lifestyle that impact on the young person in negative ways. So there's the video, there's what happens. There's a very vivid example, illustration of the sorts of things that can go on, which can lead to potential for the young person to become homeless. So now we ask about, where does mediation come in? So where does this process get involved? And we've seen there that Molly has gone to the homelessness charity, and the charity has got in touch with Mum and invited Mum, as a matter of urgency, to come into the project and talk about engaging with mediation with Molly. And here we see a still from the video, which is part of what comes next, of Molly and the Molly and her mum coming into mediation with me in the role of mediator, I'm afraid. So if you do want to see the rest of this video, and you're very welcome to see it, there was what we call a Mediation Showcase that we broadcast a while ago. It's on YouTube, and we're going to put a link up so that you can, if you wish, go and look at a potted version of this whole video. So you will see those conflict scenes, you'll see the setup, the build-up to the conflict, the situation where Molly ends up leaving the family home, and then you'll see what actually happens through the mediation process. If you want to look at the the nuts and bolts of how that mediation works. So we'll put a link up and you can find that on YouTube. So what we're doing in mediation, there's a few myths and legends about mediation. It is not that well understood, I would say, in some areas. It's got nothing to do with meditation, contrary to many people's beliefs. A bit of a problem with the word. But what it is, it's about setting up an environment for family members to come up with their own workable solutions. So it's about not arbitrating and telling people what to do. It's not about making judgments about who's right or wrong. It's not about imposing values. It's very much a facilitator who's impartial, helping people to come up with their own workable solutions. So it's not just about having a chat. It's actually a practical plan, an action plan that can be implemented. It's within the gift of the young person and their parent or carer to actually make this happen. For how the young person will either integrate better with the family home, or if it's not appropriate for them to integrate better with the family home, for them to leave with dignity and to move on to an alternative setting so that they can be safe and secure and supported. So there's some controversy around the use of this term homelessness mediation, because sometimes the aim of the mediation is not to prevent the young person from leaving the family home, because actually some family homes, they'd be better off out of it. So there may be situations where it's more appropriate for them to go to alternative settings. So that could be supported housing, it could be a hostel setting, it could be a shared residence, it could be, for the time being, sofa surfing or staying with a relative. But in some situation, whatever situation it is, so that they are safe and they're secure and they're supported and they're not ended up on the street. So that can be the focus of the mediation, and also thinking about how this gets provided. It gets provided through agencies such as, some of our attendees today have probably heard of Night Stop. There are various charities like DePaul UK and St Basil's and Bernardo's. It can also be provided through local authorities. And then I'll come to a question that we've had. I was just waiting to get to this point before I answer your question. Richard Sharrett is asking, I was wondering, is there any government funding for this type of mediation? Well, there is, Richard. It's a little bit postcodey, so depending on what your local authority's arrangement is, we have trained a lot of housing and homelessness workers within local authorities to offer exactly this kind of intervention. So it's worth looking on your local authority's website and see if they will provide this type of mediation. It's free at the point of delivery if they do. It's all about what provision they've got. I've got in brackets there family group conferencing, because this is something that's actually came from New Zealand some years ago. It is in effect a form of mediation, but it involves the wider family group. So this is about getting the young person and the parent and carer together with aunties and uncles, nana and grandpa, other siblings perhaps, so that it's a wider family group who can look at what would be a preferred arrangement for that young person. If it's not in their best interest to stay at home with the parent and carer, how can other family members chip in and actually offer to support the young person, making available accommodation, temporary or otherwise, but in any event making sure that the person remains in contact with the wider family and that they are safe, secure and supported. So this is offered through local authorities. And again, Richard, in relation to your question, have a look at your local authority website. You may find that they offer it. Some community mediation services also offer it, but in our experience it's largely offered through charities. Some charities do receive a modicum of local authority funding as well. One such charity, just to keep this sort of real, that we work with, a bit of a case study that we're going to talk about here briefly, is an organisation down in Croydon called CAISH. We work with dozens and dozens of organisations and charities. We've picked this one. They do a particularly good job of the kind of stuff that we're talking about, and we've partnered with them over the last few years. It stands for Croydon Area Young Persons Support for Housing, or Support for Homelessness. So CAISH is a charity, and here we are with their lovely workers, a group that we trained and qualified as mediators. So they have these workers in this charity. They have some supported housing projects. They have the arrangement where a young person can go and stay for a temporary period with a host family. So host families receive money from local authorities to go and to put up a young person for a period while that young person finds their feet. And they work with families. What they do also is offer now mediation as a very first intervention. So as soon as they come into contact with a young person who's been made homeless, which means them in many cases pitching up on the door of this charity with a black bag with all their belongings in, then these workers get in touch with the family and offer mediation at that very early stage. So let's just have a quick look at what we've done with them. We've delivered our training to them, to a group of workers, externally accredited level 4 qualification as mediators, tailored it to their requirements. So we're working with them around the carers, parents, host family type arrangement. And what we do now is we go back and offer quarterly case supervision. So we support their mediators to do this work, go back and discuss cases, look at ongoing learning and development, professional practice, and helping them to continue to develop their skills, because it's quite tough work. And it's important that workers are supported if they're doing this kind of stuff, so they don't feel that they're having to carry it alone. So enough from me for a minute. Let's hear from Anne Tighe. Anne is the CEO of Cache. She's been closely involved with us from the start of the project that we've done with them. And rather just hear it from me, let's get it from the CEO of one charity who does some great work in this area. So let's just hear this interview with Anne Tighe.
Let me first start with telling you a little bit about the work of Cache. Cache has been running for 38 years, a well-established organisation, and it provides advice, support and accommodation for young people who are either homeless or facing homeless. So a lot of our work is about prevention and preventing homelessness for young people, and we operate in quite a few London boroughs. Training up mediators was something that we realised was very important in terms of our agenda around prevention. So when the recent Homelessness Prevention Act came in, we saw an opportunity to expand our work that had already started in a small way with a one worker being involved in restoring families. And I saw this as a way of expanding the work, of trying to help young people remain at home where safe to do so, rather than be placed in expensive and sometimes, quite frightening environments in terms of not being used to living with other young people in shared accommodation. So that's really why we started to think about mediation, and more importantly, we saw it as an effective tool to actually repair relationships. And I think that's the most important aspect of it. Although it does prevent homelessness, it also helps educate families, young people and others how to communicate effectively and positively. We have some very vulnerable and complex young people come through our doors, some of whom are not able to remain at home, but might be in a situation where they are living independently and have perhaps run up some arrears with the landlord, and there's a need to mediate between the landlord and the young person. But the bulk of our work is around restoring family relationships and making sure young people, where they can safely stay at home. So I think this year we have managed about 60 cases in one element of our work, and the success rate or the outcomes have been around about 70% have been able to stay in their family accommodation, which is brilliant because one, it's more beneficial to the young person, but also provides a saving to the local authority in terms of accommodating a young person. The plan for mediation for our organisation is that we will definitely be expanding the service. We see this as a valuable method of helping young people build up more positive and resilient relationships. And I think key to that is to continue with it as a specialism within our service, ensuring that it has the right clinical supervision from UK Mediation, who have trained our staff, and taking them to the next level in terms of their skills and expertise, because then they are able to apply that in a number of circumstances throughout their work, and sometimes even mediate between staff where there are difficulties, because it's a very stressful job dealing with vulnerable young people. The most important people in this organisation are the staff. They're our most valuable assets, and it's important that we invest heavily in their training and supervision. So when you have introduced a specialist skill into an organisation, you don't just leave it to its own sort of development and creation. It needs shaping and supporting. And I realised that with the type of cases that they were managing, mediating between very vulnerable young people and very distressed and distraught families, that it was important that they didn't just have supervision from their line manager, but that we actually built in reflective practice and clinical supervision with, the specialist organisation, which is UK Mediation. They meet with UK Mediation 4 times a year and are able to reflect on cases that haven't resolved in the way that they felt they should have resolved, or they're stuck. Either they're stuck as a worker, or the mediation process has got stuck and needs reviewing and needs redirecting to be able to get to that end resolution. I would suggest that other organisations look at how they can generate those skills within their teams to enable them to deliver prevention of homelessness effectively in terms of cost saving and in terms of the impact on the outcomes for the individual. There's no comparison. It is really beneficial to both staff in feeling that they're developing a particular skill, but also the young people. So I would suggest that if they don't have a service themselves, that either they look to organisations who have established mediation teams and look to them to provide that service, or look at setting up their own service.
So thanks very much to Anne Ty for doing that interview with us, talking all about really the practical application of the stuff we're talking about today, how it's been put to great use with Caish. They're doing a fantastic job down there, very dedicated workers. When I run the supervision groups with them, I'm always very impressed how they really get a very dedicated bunch, really get stuck in with these situations and trying to prevent the sort of stuff we're talking about earlier on, trying to avoid, those quite scary statistics about how many people are finding themselves on the streets. Caish's mission is to really prevent that happening and try and stop that. So fair play to Caish. Let's talk about how mediation works. Quick thing here. So we talked about all the statistics, about the sort of the vivid illustration of the sort of conflict that can give rise to a need for mediation, and there we go back with Molly and Sally in a mediation setting. So let's have a think about these two, and if they were coming into mediation, what would be some of the essential requirements? The first thing is it needs to be voluntary. There's no way we can force people to take part in mediation. They need to walk towards it. If we require people to take part in mediation or in any way compel them to do so, you get such resistance, it's really not going to work. And if people just make an agreement so they can get out of there, we can pretty well guarantee that agreement's not going to work. So voluntary participation is a key building block of mediation. Second thing is about, easy to say, very hard to do, but it's the impartial aspect of mediation. So the mediator, the person in the role of trying to get the conversation going between the parent and the young person, needs not to be having any imposition of their own values, needs not to be looking at who's right or wrong, not considering about who's to blame. We've got to be very careful of what I called finger wagging there, about trying to impose your own values and either taking one side or another. So if we're not careful, we can end up advocating for the young person and we alienate the parent or carer. And equally, if we're not careful, we can end up siding with the parent or carer and chastising the young person into doing the parent's will. So we've got to be very careful about that and keep this very strong version of impartiality. And like I say, it's one of the hardest things for a mediator to do. And certainly it requires constant work. I've been mediating for about 20 years and I've done around 1,200 mediation cases over that time, and certainly the impartiality is something that's always getting challenged. It's something I've got to keep a constant eye on. The other thing is these conversations are very sensitive. As we saw in the video there's something about Molly's got a new boyfriend, there's whatever she's doing outside of the home. There are been some difficult exchanges in the home between Molly and her mum. There are things that they don't want broadcast outside of the mediation room, and it's important that we get to the heart of the conflict and actually get down to what it is about their failed relationship. You know, and the thing is, with working with families, it's not the same as mediating a workplace dispute or a neighbourhood dispute or some commercial matter around finances and contracts. This is very much more personal. It's around family relationships. And in some cases, the mediation can verge on looking a bit more like family therapy. So what we've got to be sure is that in the setting of the mediation, people get to say exactly what they like, and that stays in the room. So we've got to be careful with safeguarding issues, of course, and clearly there are some safeguarding concerns around how the younger sibling is being affected by what's going on with Molly and Sally in this particular scenario. So we will breach confidentiality in order to make sure that people are safeguarded and that everybody's well-being is being considered. But apart from that, the content of what they say in mediation stays in the room. People get to say what they like. It doesn't go any further. We don't retain notes. We don't write a report of what they've disclosed. And the mediator would have a very strict agreement with the parties that he or she would keep things private. So as I said, if you want to see a bit more of the mediation between Sally and Molly, we've put a link up there and you can watch it on our recent Family Mediation Online Showcase. Just follow that link and you'll see a presentation of how the mediation goes between those two. Well, how does it work, the mediation? I mean, if you watch the, like I say, watch the video, it might be quite illuminating, but the key aspects of mediation is that both sides get to hear how their own words and behaviours have impacted on the other party. So Molly gets to hear, in this private setting, with an impartial facilitator, in terms of her voluntary participation in the process, she gets to hear from Mum about how her conduct and her manner towards Mum have impacted on Mum. And also, Molly gets to hear from Mum Mum gets to hear from Molly about how Mum's conduct has impacted on Molly. So she gets to hear from Molly about her manner, about her approach to Molly, about how she is towards her, and how Molly has been affected by that. So we build the empathy between the two parties by exploring the impact of one another's words and behaviours on the other party. You get a chance to explain your motivations to the other, have a good conversation. Often in mediation, it's the best conversation they've ever had. And certainly we hear the comment all the time that this conversation is long overdue. We should have done this years ago. So it's a great conversation. They get to explain their motivations and get to respond to one another's thoughts and feelings about that, about their motivations and about who they are really. And the other thing is that saying the unsayable, particularly in the confidential environment, the things that are difficult to say get said, and resentments that have built up for a long time can be expressed. And you can just imagine some of the things that might get said between Molly and Sally in the mediation. And ultimately the collaboration builds. So they start to collaborate and put their heads together and think about, well, okay, what are we going to do? Rather than banging their heads together and trying to prove who's right and who's wrong. So Molly's trying to assert her independence. She wants to have her own life outside of the home. Sally wants to make sure that the younger sibling is okay, and also wants to have some sense of being in control of her own home, having some sense of rules and order in the house. And if they can put their heads together and collaborate on these issues, find a way that they can both get what they need from the conversation, make a future focused plan, then that's a great outcome from the mediation. So that's kind of how it works. And how we make the most of mediation in this setting is clearly, as I was saying with Keish, what Keish do very much is on the first phone call with the parent or the young person, what they're doing is offering mediation right early on, and this would be our strong recommendation. Don't leave it until communication's completely broken down. Try and offer mediation early on. Ensure that it's voluntary. Don't force people into it. It has to be seen to be voluntary. They're going to resist it if they feel they're doing it against their will, and I think it's just an aspect of the human condition. We don't like being told what to do if we don't want to do it. So we have to make sure that they're there voluntarily. And then the third thing, the key thing, which I've mentioned already, is about in terms of how the facilitator conducts him or herself. It's about staying truly impartial. People don't want you to judge. They don't want you to take sides or tell them what to do. And even though people might try and hook you into seeing things their way, so the young person might try and hook you into advocating for their interests, the parent might try and hook you into backing them up in terms of imposing some rules in the household, etc. We've got to resist that, and we've got to stay truly impartial. Otherwise, I can tell you from bitter experience that it really doesn't work. So there we have it. There's some ideas about the sort of statistics of this stuff, about the Homelessness Reduction Bill, about what mediation is, and some ideas about how it works, how it's been implemented in a real example with Caish, and a vivid illustration of the sort of conflict that can lead to potentially a young person becoming homeless, and then some stuff about how mediation works and how to make the most of it. So thanks very much for watching. I've got a couple of questions queued up, and also a couple have come in by email. Here's one from Jessica, who says, are there any special considerations that need to be made when the young person has mental health or drug issues? So somebody is misusing drugs and alcohol or has mental health problems. Yes, there are really. It's a good question, and there's a very high prevalence of mental health issues, particularly anxiety and depression amongst young people who are in difficult family situations. You could argue that one causes the other. It's hard to say really, but clearly if somebody has a level of mental health problems, that means they can't fully participate in the process, then we need to make the important ethical decision as to whether they can be making an agreement that will potentially affect their life and their future, you know, whether they have the capacity to do that or not. There is some potential for people having supporters or advocates in order to make sure the young person can get their points across, not to speak for them, but just to support them to get their points across and make sure that the young person is given the opportunity to participate fully in the mediation. And ultimately the mediator has to make a judgment about whether the mediation is going to cause people more harm than good. And our bottom line of our code of ethics that we use here at UK Mediation is do no harm. So we've got to make sure that somebody coming into mediation, A, has the capacity, B, knows what they're doing and what they're agreeing to, and C, that we're not going to cause any harm by virtue of the mediation. But it's a very important question, Jessica. Thank you very much, because it is something we come across quite a lot. And just one more for now is that we've got a question here by email from somebody who works in a residential supported housing setting with 10 young people, and there's a lot of conflict between the residents. Okay, so these guys have come into effectively a shared house with it would be like a concierge type arrangement, I imagine. There would be some housing workers, homelessness workers within the project, probably 9 to 5, and probably with a concierge outside of those hours. It's an environment, it's a hotbed for conflict between the youngsters. There can be all sorts of things that kick off in those settings. Could mediation work well here? The question is, yes, it absolutely could. And some of the projects with Caish are exactly that. So it's looking at resolving those day-to-day conflicts between youngsters in those settings, getting people around the kitchen table to come to an agreement about things that come up, which can be from failed relationships between the residents sometimes. It can be stresses that are caused from the outside to do with stuff to do with finances, benefits, families, or it can be day-to-day things like a real example recently was about some arguments around Xbox usage and somebody's Xbox getting broken in such a setting, and it caused ructions. It sounds like a small thing, but it wasn't. So yes, indeed, you can use mediation in those settings. And it sometimes gives rise to the question about who should be the mediator. So if it's somebody who's in daily contact with those residents, who knows them quite well, it's very hard just to suddenly put your mediator's hat on and go, right, I'm a mediator now, let's sort this conflict out. It might be appropriate to bring somebody else in from your project or from your authority or the charity in order to be the mediator in that case. But yes, certainly you can use mediation in that setting. It's a very good place to do so. So I'm just going to skip on. Don't want to run over too long and steal your Friday afternoon. A few other webinars we've got around the corner. I'll go through these really quickly. You can find them all on the website. We're doing a webinar on mediation in higher education in the university sector, one in local authorities talking about kind of conflict that comes up in those sort of settings, one on workplace bullying in March, very big hot topic at the moment. So all of these are on the website. You can find them on the link that we've just put up in the chat box. So follow that link, you'll find a list of our future webinars. So that's pretty well me for this Friday afternoon. I do hope that you've benefited from this webinar. I do hope to see you again on some future webinars. We love you to keep in touch. So check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter. You can link with me on LinkedIn. and check out our Facebook page as well. So it's been nice to have you here this afternoon. Have a great weekend. This is the last one for 2019. So be safe over Christmas. Keep an eye out for each other. And we'll see you in the new year.